This is the Defenders podcast on TV Podcast Industries. We're here with Marvel 616, episode 6. Ooh, lots of sixes in there.
Lots of sixes.
Unboxed. Welcome back once again, fellow Defenders. We are discussing the Marvel Universe once again with our discussion about the documentary series Marvel 616, Episode 6, Unboxed on TV Podcast Industries. I'm one of your hosts, Derek.
Hello there, fellow Defenders. I am one of your other hosts, John. Yes, Unboxed.
Yes, we are running through this series of Marvel 616 on Disney Plus, already up to episode 6 with just 2 more after this to go. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast over on tvpodcastindustries.com. We will be covering lots of Marvel this year. That's why we're starting out with Marvel 616. If you subscribe to us on tvpodcastindustries.com, you'll get our episodes of WandaVision, which will be coming out from the 15th of January 2021. So we're really looking forward to getting back into Marvel. We did cover so many episodes of Marvel TV over the last couple of years that we just really wanted to settle ourselves back into some Marvel before we get into a new TV series.
Absolutely. We're also over on Patreon at patreon.com/TV Podcast Industries. So you can support us any which way you want to, whether subscribing to the podcast or joining us on Patreon as well, Absolutely. Where this is currently being published early for our patrons.
Yes. If you've been listening on our Patreon feed, you've been getting these a little bit earlier than they went out on our main feed on tvpodcastindustries.com. But let's get into our discussion about the 6th episode of Marvel 616. This is probably the shortest one of all the episodes of the documentary series. I think it's 37 minutes.
Yeah, it's just short of 40 minutes long, and it's exploring the relationship, I suppose, between toys and comics primarily.
Yeah.
I think this very much focuses on it from the industry point of view, being within the industry.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting one. I would say that possibly so far this is the weakest for me.
Yeah, I'd agree.
I think whether that was because it was only 38 minutes, and it could have done with the full hour, just to explore maybe the people who collect and buy and who are fans of, toys that are based on comics. Because I don't think, effectively looking at, say, the first 3 episodes of this series where it's all around Marvel and the workings within Marvel on a specific theme, this felt like, we don't know enough about the toy industry to understand it from that point of view. And I think this could have really have done with more of a focus on the collectors and the fans of toys, because and I think that would have really connected it nicely with episode 5 as well, on Suit Up, because the toys are another big part of Comic-Con. The figures, the action figures, from Funko Pops to, really high-end kind of figurines. I remember, one of the years we're at New York Comic Con, Weta Workshop was there, who did everything on Lord of the Rings, and they had a Balrog there for like $1,000.
That's right.
But it was so well detailed, so nicely done.
Yeah.
So,
but it wouldn't fit in our house, John.
No,
that's why you were not allowed to buy it.
That's why I was not allowed to buy this. And I think that's the thing. I had, we both have a lot of figurines of Doctor Strange, of Nick Fury, and a whole range of different figurines, a lot of Star Wars stuff. So this felt something like you could immediately connect in with, like with the cosplay stuff. And I just wish they'd focused a bit more on the fans.
I think what I can get what they were trying to do. Obviously, the people that are working the industry, they're trying to show that they are true fans themselves. A lot of them had kind of come from backgrounds of collecting themselves and wanted to do work in the industry. And that's similar to what you were saying earlier on about people that have gotten into comic books as artists or writers, who wanted to work for Marvel. And these are people that wanted to work for toy companies and get to work with Marvel, and they're really excited about it. And I get that, but I suppose probably seeing some of their home collections might have been more interesting. We do see that with 1 or 2 of the people that work there. We see that they are also collectors at home, but
it
felt a little bit more corporate, I suppose, than
and some of the history of the different toys. Like that was kind of one of the interesting parts about this. I think, there's 3 or 4, little kind of parts of this episode that actually are really interesting. And there's one bit about how, toys that were born from comics, but also how then toys influence comics. And that was primarily through Mattel with the Secret Wars events. And then also with Toy Biz, effectively buying Marvel in the 1990s, and bringing Marvel Legends. And I think that was most interesting. This idea of, where they believed toys could be done differently. And you have this really nice, moment with Anne Jasperson, who was a technical drawer. She talks about the Marvel Universe, book, which has all the figures, what they look like, what needs to be on their costume. And she does this technical drawing from the side, the front, the back, and the right side, from the 2 sides. And, this flat form of the toy that's going to the sculptor.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting. And she just talked about how, Marvel, it was always oversized pecs and oversized thighs and all this kind of stuff. And I think with Toy Biz, then it was this idea that you would do them to scale and to form, because in the past, all the figures were all the same size.
Yeah.
But if you were going to do something like Hulk, you would do it the correct proportional size
should
and
be
form.
Like 4 or 5 times the size of Spider-Man or something
exactly.
like that.
So, and that was, I thought, really nice. They talked about, Marvel Legends, but also with the Black Spider-Man costume that was spun off into ultimately Venom. So I like that
Came
little
from Secret Wars.
I like that little teasing out between that relationship. I think, it would have been nice to have just seen, going from the comics to a technical drawer like Anne Jasperson to the sculptor. If you're going to keep it within the industry, maybe a few more people in the chain that lead to then this either bespoke production or mass production of different figures.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, because it was interesting, as you mentioned, about the Secret Wars event, this event in comic books which brought all of the heroes together.
Yeah.
I think it was about 10 when that came out, or maybe a little bit younger than that. And I remember seeing that comic book and just being so excited at the idea that you would have the Avengers, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, X-Men all together fighting one bad guy. It's something that we all really enjoy now. That's what, the big Avengers movie is playing on that as well, but having that in comic book form and then it's spinning out into toys as well, I certainly remember that capturing my interest in toys in a different way, back in the 80s, suddenly being really interested in getting every single Marvel toy I could get my hands on if I could. And it suddenly kindled my interest in getting my hands on every Marvel toy. We were all big fans of Star Wars at the time, picking up every Star Wars toy possible, and this suddenly, in my head anyway, made me want to get Marvel toys in the same way. So they accomplished their goal with the Secret War event. And nowadays, which is something they didn't really talk about now, every year there's an event which brings together every character in the Marvel universe, whereas back then in the 80s, that wasn't something they did very often. They didn't cross over every single book together. So were they saying here in the documentary that Mattel effectively created that event concept for Marvel because they wanted to sell toys, and now it's become something that now Marvel used to sell lots and lots of comic books?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the most personal part of this is through a toy photographer, Mitchell Wu, who actually said he loved toys, but he actually did wedding photography and then moved to doing toy photography. But I thought it was really interesting just how he captured it, because he made it really dynamic.
Absolutely.
There's a great one of Professor Xavier floating in his chair and him just doing sort of with an air gun to bring up dirt. There's one of Squirrel Girl fighting Thanos that he remembers from comics. And him, having things on sticks, brushing it out, but it looked really dynamic. And he opens up this New York Toy Fair and has this.
He's the guest of honor.
He's guest of honor. Big scissors to open it up with the ribbon. But he has his exhibition. There's a great one of Hulk with blowing a dandelion. And it's just really nicely done, but it comes from his point of being someone just loving toys as a kid. And that's the only time you really get that sense, from it. As you said, I think, and Jasperson mentions about a lot of people in the toy industry, they've never lost their intellectual child for exploring, and they retain that fascination with toys. But in a sense, you don't really get that journey, unfortunately, other than maybe with Mitchell Wu.
Yeah.
And I think that's another one of the points in this episode that I found pretty interesting. And certainly just how you can take, when they said toy photography, I was just like, well, how is this going to work?
Yeah.
And I just thought they were just taking photos. And how would you do anything like that? And just what he did with water and dirt and lighting, it was kind of really interesting, for sure. And there's another nice little bit around Funko Pops, with Sean Wilkinson. Yeah. And, that was just really good just because they're so different. They come from a very different perspective, but with one of his artists, I think they're doing Thor. And he just asks him to tone down the abs on the Funko Pop because just to make it more pop, rather than,
It's not a realistic thing printed on a pop head. They have to have that certain style that feels like Funko Pop. They are just absolutely massive as an organization. And it's something that you never thought would work. This idea that, they have gone out and sought out every single type of fandom and have created pops around it, like everything from musicians to baseball players and football players and Marvel and Star Wars and TV shows and movies. They've done hundreds of thousands of that's just the same kind of base that makes it look very different.
And it's kind of really interesting.
It's so intriguing what's behind it.
Yeah. And like there's a nice little section where it's one of the artists designing Groot, who's been taken over by Venom, because they're doing this whole venomizing of Marvel characters and just how, some of the aspects that go into trying to put that into a Funko Pop figure was really, really interesting for sure.
Yeah, really like that. But overall, as you say, this is probably my least favorite of the episodes, but it's probably just because there's so much other stuff you could tell about the story of the relationship between fans and the toys and fans and the figures and everything else that's involved. So I wonder, was there just some other element that they were going to put in there? Like, as I was saying to you, John, before we recorded, that all of the releases of these toys that are done at Toy Fair and are done at places like New York Comic Con are really big. There's people gathered around hours and hours in advance waiting for the release of this, an announcement of this. And it's a very exciting moment for a lot of toy collectors where they didn't capture any of that at all.
No, exactly.
And it felt like they were missing something.
It did. And it's really weird because the little blurb for this episode talks about, exploring the community that's formed between, the comics industry and the toys industry.
Yeah.
And you don't really get a sense of that community. You just get a sense of the people who work in the toy industry, doing it. And I think if you do, it's mainly with Mitchell Wu. Exactly. Because he is outside of it as a photographer and has worked his way into it. Again. But, I think it just missed something. But I think there are a few nice little snippets that you can really pick onto. I think if you want to watch it, do. And I think the Ann Jasperson, the Mitchell Wu, and Sean Wilkinson, I think they're the most illuminating, around how toys and comics, that relationship between them. So
yeah, absolutely. That it pretty much for our discussion on episode 6 of Marvel 616 Unboxed. Excellent. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode. Come back and join us. As we said, we're building up to the launch of WandaVision on Disney Plus, coming up on the 15th of January. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast at tvpodcastindustries.com, to get our thoughts about those episodes as they start to be released. And, of course, join us next time for episode 7 of Marvel 616, The Marvel Method. It should be out later in the week.
Yeah, thanks so much, fellow Defenders, for joining us. It's a pleasure, as always, discussing this in bite-sized chunks, of course, this time.
Yeah.
But keep watching, keep listening, and keep defending.
Bye.
Bye.